What's up everybody, welcome back. In today's video we're gonna set up our first little game mode. So that's going to be an endless wave spawning, because that's pretty much the easiest game mode that we can think of. We're gonna use the option string for the game mode to actually set this up. So we're gonna lay the base for setting up different game modes as well. And obviously we're gonna make sure everything works in multiplayer like we always do. If you like my videos, please consider leaving a like. That helps the channel out tremendously, so I will be eternally grateful if you do. And without further announcements, let's just dive in the video. So as I mentioned in the intro, we're going to use the option string for the game mode to set up our different game modes that are available. So to do that, we need to start in our game instance. So let's open up the game instance. And we can actually use an option string for traveling with the server and also for a solo game. So if we launch a solo game, there's actually an options string in here that we can use. And if we want to use the server travel command, we have to put in our own option string. So let's start with the server travel one. So if we go to the travel to map function, we can simply add a string to our append node. And then we can add options to the string that's going to be parsed to the server. So to start this, you want to start with a question mark, and then you can simply come up with a name for an option that you want to use. So I'm simply going to call this the game mode. And then if you use the equal sign, you can define that option. So I'm going to say this game mode is endless wave. And that's pretty much all we need to do. So if you want to add more options, you separate them with a question mark again, and then you can simply add the next option. So for example, I could say some option, and then that's, well, let's say 2. So now we have 2 option strings in our game mode, and if we would add this to our solo game as well, we can simply copy this without the first question mark. We don't need it in here, and then we can put that in the open level box that's going to launch the solo game. So in here in the option string you could paste the same options, and that way they will be parsed to the game mode as well. So now that we have this in place, we can close it down and open our shooter game mode. And in here we can set up an event. So we probably want to do this when the map loads. So we have a begin play in here, I think. Yes, we do. So we can do this on begin play, for example. But then we need to store them in a variable to retrieve them later. And I think we pretty much only need to retrieve this option once. So I'm simply going to do it at the end of the for each loop where we start the level. So over here we have event handle new player, and at the end we have a for each loop. If the for each loop is completed, we're going to start the level. So I'm going to disconnect it over here. And how do we retrieve the options from the game mode? Well, that's actually really easy. We can simply right click and look for the option string. So that's a default variable that's created for the option string. And the way to retrieve options from this is drag off here and look for parse option. And in here you can simply type the option name that you came up with. So for me that was game mode. And then it will return the selected setting as a string. So for now we could do something like drag off here and switch on string. And then we can simply add the option that we created. So we do not really need a default pin, and we can add one option in here, and that's going to be endless wave. So now we know that we have our game mode set to endless wave. And to make sure that this actually works, we could do the same thing again. And then look for our second option that we created. And I'm not even sure how I called it anymore. So that was some option. And then if we retrieve that, it should say 2. So we're going to simply retrieve this and print it to the screen. So some option, return value. Let's add a print in between here, so that we can see this is working. So let's make it a color that we can remember, so something purple, and let's keep it on screen a little bit longer. So that's actually how we can use the option string, and it's a pretty handy option. So we're going to use this later to refine our game mode and game instance, and for example we could pass on the number of expected players and the is solo game booleans and things like that through the option string, and that will clean things up a little bit. So we're going to do that later in the project. For today we're going to focus on the spawning. So we have our game mode set up basically, so let's add some spawn points in the map that we can use. So in a previous episode we already created spawn points that we can use, so I'm simply gonna use this spawn point that we created earlier. There's nothing really in the blueprint, it's just so we can get the location to spawn an enemy. There's one thing that I'm gonna do. I'm gonna add text to the spawner in the map. So let's open up the map first. Let me see. So maps. Since we're gonna add multiple game modes later on, you might not want to use each spawn point for each game mode. So we can define what spawn points we want to use for a game mode by adding a tag to them. So let's see, how do we do that? Let me increase this a little bit. So this is the spawn point for the AI. I'm gonna add 4 of them, but I'm only gonna add my tag for the endless wave game mode to 2 of them. So that way you can see this is an easy way to separate actors and to make sure that we only use the ones that we want. So if we have them placed in the level, you can select them, and on the right side in the details panel we have the actors, and over here you can expand the advanced setting and add tags. And you can simply add a string to this actor, and then later when you use the get all actors of class node, we can filter by tags. So let's add a tag to the spawner, and we're gonna call this our endless wave. So we know what game mode it belongs to, and let's do the same thing for the spawner next to it. So also add the tag to that one, endless wave. And the other ones we're not going to add any text to them, so you will see we're going to end up with 2 spawners that are actually working, although we have placed 4 in the map. So we can close the map down, and then we need to go into our shooter game mode again to set up the logic. So let's open up our shooter game mode. And first of all we're going to go into our level start function. So we're going to use this function to start our endless wave. So I'm just going to rename it level start endless wave. So we know it's for that game mode. And then at the end over here, we're simply spawning 1 enemy. So we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to disconnect this and let's move it to the side. We could maybe reuse some of it later. So the first thing we want to do over here is get all the actors of class. So we're going to look for all of our spawners, but this time we want to get all actors of class with tag, and we can use the tag that we just entered. So we're going to look for our spawn points, and then we're going to look for the ones that have the endless wave tag. So now we're going to end up with 2 spawners in here. We're going to promote these to a variable. So let's call this all spawn points. And then we need a few other variables as well for our endless wave spawning. So let's just create them right away. The first one is going to be an integer, and I'm going to use prefixes to be able to see immediately what game mode this belongs to. So I'm going to say game mode endless wave, and then this is going to be the wave number. So that's going to be an integer. And then we also need the number of enemies for this wave. So let me duplicate it. Game mode endless wave, and then number of enemies this wave. And we need the enemy health for this wave. So let's duplicate it again. Game mode endless wave, and then enemy health this wave. So we need to turn this one into a float, and then we need the spawn count. So that's the current count of the spawning. So game mode endless wave spawn count, and that's going to be an integer. And the last one is a wait for wave end. So that's going to be a boolean. So GameMode endless wave, wait for wave end, and turn it into a boolean. So now I think we should have all variables in place. So over here we have all of our spawn points. Then the first thing what we're going to do is make sure that our wave number is set to 0. So let's drag it in and make sure it's set to 0. And for the enemy help this wave, we're going to set it to 100. So let's just drag it in as well. Plug it in over here and set it to 100. And then after that, we're going to call our start wave event. So we do not really have that yet. So let's move over this stuff for respawning and spectating. And let's create the new custom event. So a custom event, and that's going to be a start wave. So we want to call this right away after here. So start wave. So this should work. So we have our level start event, and that will make sure the countdown starts on the player's screen. And then after the countdown, it will enable the input for players, get all the spawners, set some defaults, and then start the start wave function. So in our start wave event, we're gonna set up the actual spawning. So first of all, let's grab our wave number and we're gonna increment it. So increment int. So we're starting our wave number at 0, so we want to do this right away. So right now we are in wave 1, and the next thing we want to do is get the current enemy count for this round. So let's make a function for that, and we're gonna call it GameMode endless wave, and then get enemy count. So this is simply a function that we can call at the start of each wave, and it will calculate the amount of enemies that are going to be in this wave. So I'm not going to make this too sophisticated. There's probably stuff on the internet you can find about wave spawning formulas and things like that. So for now I'm just going to keep it pretty simple and give it two inputs. The first one is going to be the round number or the wave number. Okay, let's call it wave number then. And then the second one is going to be the number of players. And then I'm also giving the output, and that's going to be the spawn count or the enemy count. That doesn't really matter. And then we're also going to need one local variable, and I'm going to call that the local new spawn count. And that's an integer as well. So as I mentioned, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. So I'm just going to drag the number of players and add, multiply the number of players by 2. And then I'm going to add that to the round number. So let's drag off the round number and add the outcome. And then I'm going to grab the previous number of enemies this wave. So that's the amount that was in the current wave, and we're simply going to add those together. And that should kind of work. So now I'm going to drag my new spawn count and plug it in over here. There's one thing I want to do, make sure there's a minimal amount of, let's say, 5 or 6 enemies. So in the first rounds there are actually a few enemies. Also, if you're playing solo, and this number might end up pretty low. So what I'm going to do is simply add a branch in here and check if the local new spawn count is smaller than or equal to, and let's say 5. And if it is, I'm going to increase it to 6. So just grab the local new spawn count, plug it in over here and set it manually to 6. And otherwise we're going to keep the existing value. And then we can simply plug it in over here and we should be good to go. So we can go back into our event graph. What's it? Oh yeah. So I recorded this previously and I kind of messed up. So I'm going to paste this in between. So ignore the rest that you see here right now. So the first thing that we're going to do is this little part. So we have increased the wave number, and then we're going to call our new enemy count function, and we need to plug in our wave number and the amount of players. So we can drag in our connected player controllers and then get the length of that array and plug it into the number of players. And we simply want to set it to our new enemy count this wave. So that should be good to go, and now we can continue creating the next function. And then we also need the health for the enemies in this wave, so let's create a function for that as well. The GameMode and this wave get enemy health. So in case we want to increase the health each round or each wave, we can do it in this function. So let's add an input in here, and that's the round number or wave number. And then an output, and that's going to be the enemy health. And that's a float. So again, I'm not going to make this really sophisticated, so we're simply going to say if it's round number 1, we want to keep it at 100. So let's plug it in over here, make sure this is set to 1. And then we're simply going to grab our, do we need a local variable? We don't really need it. So we can simply, well, let's use a local variable and keep everything tidy. So let's make it local new health. So that way we don't have to put the setter in this function, and that keeps things a little bit more organized. So for the new health, we're going to use the float and then drag it in with a setter and simply set it to 100 for round number 1. And if it's a higher round, we could do something like add 10 or add 10% or something like that, whatever you want to do. So I'm just going to grab the previous health, so that's enemy health this wave, and I'm going to add 10 to it. Nothing special. So that should work. So plug it into the return node and use our local variable to return it. And then in the event graph, call the function and make sure we set the variable. So enemy health this wave, and plug it in as well. And we need to plug in our wave number over here. So that should be good to go. Okay, with those functions in place, we can start the actual spawning. So you could add something of a print in here and print all of the options, so you know what happens each round, and you can make adjustments to your formulas if you want to. So then we're going to create a new custom event and call that wave spawning. So custom event wave spawning. And first of all, because we are not using a function, we cannot use local variables. So we need to make sure that we reset the variables that we are using. So we're going to grab the spawn count and set it to 0 first. So if this was a function with a local variable and we would come in a new function, then this would automatically be the default value. But since that's not the case, we need to make sure that we reset it over here. So then we're going to simply spawn an actor. So spawn actor from class, and we want to spawn our minion base or your enemy character. And for the spawn transform, we can drag in all of our spawn points and simply get a random one. So get random array item, and from here we can get the transform and simply plug it in. So that should work already. Let's check if the spawn actually did something. So we're going to make sure that the enemy is valid. Plug it in over here. Oh, come on. So if it's not valid, we're going to add a small delay, something like 0.2 seconds, and then simply go back to the spawn actor from class. So we're going to try again. What the? There we go. So if it is valid, we want to increase our spawn count. So first of all, we're going to drag in the spawn count and increment the integer. There we go, and then we're gonna set up the enemy. So we're gonna create a small function for that. Right now we only actually set the health, but maybe we want to do other stuff in the future, and it's nice to have a clean function for that as well. So let's call it GameMode, endless wave, and then setup enemy. So in here we're gonna need a reference to the actual enemy, so that's our minion base character. So let's call this one enemy, and then the type is minion base. And in here we're simply gonna drag off and set the health, plug it in, and set it to the health for the enemy health this wave. And then we can return already. No, not this one. There we go. And then we're gonna call this function right after the enemy spawned. So setup enemy and connect it up. Make sure that you plug in the result or the return value into the enemy pin. And then let me see, we want to check if we already spawned enough enemies or not. So let's get a branch in here, and we want to compare our spawn count to our number of enemies for this wave. So equal number of enemies this wave. Plug it into the condition. So if this is false, we can add a little wait in here. So that's actually the delay between enemies spawning. So we could randomize this a little. Let's get a random integer in range. Excuse me. So I'm going to use a random integer and say from 15 to 25, and then I'm going to divide it by 10. So that way the variation is a little bit bigger. So if I would pick a random float and say from 1.5 to 2.5, I could get endless more variations. So in this case, we're going to make sure that we have a little bigger steps in between our actual random number, if that makes any sense. So we're going to plug it in over here, and then we can simply loop back to the beginning. So we're going to spawn another enemy again, and if we actually have spawned enough enemies, then we're going to grab our boolean in here and make sure that we set it to false. And then we want to check if all of the enemies that have spawned are already dead or not. So we're going to wait till we end the wave until all enemies have died. So what we want to do is get all the actors of class. And we want to get all of our enemies. So that's all of our minions or minion base characters. And then we're going to grab for each loop with break. So let's drag off here for each loop with break and plug it in. So we want to check if our current enemy is alive or not. So it could be we have killed him, but its corpse is still laying on the ground. So then he actually is in the level and he is counting towards the array, but we do not want to count him for the round wait. So we're gonna get is alive and add a branch in here. So if this is true, that means there's actually still at least one enemy alive. So in that case, we want to wait. So we're gonna drag in our boolean and set it to true. And then we're gonna break the loop, because at this point, there's no need to check any other actors. We already know we need to wait until all of them died. So now the loop is gonna end and we are gonna continue from the completed pin. So over here, we're gonna add a branch and we want to actually check if this is set to true or not. So if we want to wait for the wave to end, or if all of our enemies already died. So if they're all dead, this will remain false. So over here, if the pin is false, the wave will end. So first let's do the true pin. Let's add a delay in here. And you might want to bump this up to something like 0.5 or even 1 second. So they get all actors of class. You don't want to do that like 10 times a second, because it's a pretty heavy operation, especially if there's a lot of enemies in the map. So you might want to bump this up from 0 to 5 or 1 second, something like that. And then we can simply plug it back into the beginning over here, so make sure that you set the bool back to false, otherwise you will be stuck in this loop forever. So that's going to loop back here. And then if it's false, our wave actually ended. So we're going to add a little intermission between waves. So a little pause for players to catch their breath and maybe buy a weapon or get some ammo or things like that. And then we're going to start a new wave. So let's add a new custom event. And that's going to be our wave intermission. And for now, I'm simply going to add a print in here and say wave ended intermission. Wave ended intermission. And let's make this something like green. And put it on screen for 5 seconds. And then I'm gonna keep a really small intermission because right now we can't really do anything. So let's just make it a 3-second intermission. And then I'm gonna add another print. So intermission ended. And then new wave starting. So I kind of spit out some Dutch words there. Sometimes that happens. New wave started. There we go. And then we simply want to call our wave start event, and that will restart the cycle. So start wave event. And this will go back over here, increase the round number, get the new enemy count, calculate the new health, and then from here we want to actually call our wave spawning function. So let's drag off here and call wave spawning. So if we set the new defaults for the round, call wave spawning, start spawning the enemies, wait till all of them have been killed, and then do the intermission, and so on and so on. So that's our simple gameplay loop. Let me see, we have this in place, so we need to make a few small changes to the enemy and probably the HUD, and then we're gonna start testing this. So I'll be back in a sec. So there's a few small things we need to do. Before we do that, in the shooter game mode, we need to make sure that over here where we actually spawn the players, so we have the parsed our option string, so we want to reconnect our level start endless wave, or make sure you call it. I disconnected it, so make sure it's connected over here as well. Then we want to go in to our AI minion character, so AI minion base, and in here we're going to look for the die event. Let me grab my notes quickly. So we actually want to make sure that we start deleting enemies, because right now we're going to start spawning a whole lot more of them. So if they stay in the level, we're going to end up with performance issues and other issues as well. So the easiest thing to do is go to the start ragdoll event. So this will execute right at the end of the die montage, and then the enemy will go into ragdoll. So this is kind of multicast. It's not a multicast event, but it runs on all instances because it's executed with a notify. And then over here we have a server check. So this is only handled by the server, and from here we can simply delete the actor. So let's add a small delay in here, and we can randomize it. So let's get a random integer in range. And then maybe something like in between 3 and 6 seconds. And then we're gonna delete the dead enemy. So simply destroy actor. And because we are the server and this blueprint is replicated, this will be deleted for all players as well. So that's what we're gonna do in the minion character. And then also in our in-game HUD, I want to add a few small changes. So let's go to the widgets folder and open our in-game HUD. So in here we have the text for the countdown, and I'm also going to use the countdown text for the starting of the wave, what tells the player what wave it is. So we're going to make a few small changes. Let's go to the event graph, and we have our game start countdown function in here. So first of all, I'm just going to connect this back up to the beginning. And then all I'm going to do in here is keep the actual countdown, but not the end where it says round 1 start and stuff like that, because I want to handle that with a separate function, so that we can call that function when wave 1 starts and also when wave 2 and 3 starts. So we do not need to separate that. So long story short, we're going to separate the countdown from the wave text. So let's disconnect it over here, and then we don't need the wait as well. And we're going to create a new custom event and call it something like GameMode endless wave, and then start new wave. So all I'm going to do for now is display the text wave with the current wave number for 3 seconds on the screen. Obviously you could go in the designer and make a UI animation, make moving text and have stuff fade in and fade out or whatever you want. But that's not really what this tutorial is about. So for now I'm just going to drag in my text countdown, and then over here I want to set the text, plug it in over here. So we need the actual wave number as an input, so let's create that first, and that's our wave number. So that's an integer, and then we can grab a format text node to make this look a little bit cleaner. So we're going to say a wave and then open bracket a close bracket, so that will create the wildcard for us, and we can plug in our wave number. So that should be good to go. And then we want to make sure that we set this to visible, so set visibility and make sure it's visible, and we're going to wait for 3 seconds and then just hide it again. So delay 3 seconds, copy and paste it over here and simply hide it and plug in the target. So that should be good to go. And now over here we have a 2-second countdown. Well, that doesn't really matter. I think the countdown in the game mode is still set to 1 second, so we can adjust it later. There's no need to actually worry about it when testing. So with that in place, let's dive into our shooter player controller. So let's go to the game mode and into our shooter player controller again. So in here we want to make sure that we display our HUD function. So let me grab my notes quickly. We can actually go to the beginning of the... Oh, we need to create the client event. I'm sorry, I'm confused with the shooter game mode. So we're actually in the shooter player controller right now. So what we're going to do in here is create a custom event and call that client HUD start new wave. So client HUD start new wave. And this is going to be run on the owning client, and we could make it reliable. It's not really needed, but it's also not an event that's going to execute 10 times a second, so we could just do that. And then we're going to drag in our in-game HUD and simply call our start new wave function. So that's our game mode endless wave start new wave. And we want to pass on our wave number into the event. And with this event in place, we can go into our shooter game mode and make sure that the player sees it at the start of the level. And for that, I think we're going to go to the wave start function. So let me double check my notes. Yeah, so right after the wave start, we're going to disconnect the increment int over here, and we're simply going to grab a for each loop for all of the connected player controllers. So since we have all the player controllers here, we are the server, so we can simply drag over here and call our client HUD start new wave function, and that will replicate to the owning client. So we can plug in our current wave number, and that should be good to go. Then make sure that you continue from the completed pin and plug it back in over here. So we have our countdown here. So yeah, that's still set to 1 second, so the text probably won't match up with the actual countdown, but that doesn't really matter right now. There's one thing we need to do, I think. No, that should be all actually. So we should be able to test this. So let's compile and save. And we could test in a 2-player game, why not? selected viewport, and we need to launch from the main menu. There we go. So right now, if we launch the map, we should have the server print one of our option strings, and that's our test option, I think it was called, with the option set to 2. And we should have our wave spawning working as well. So let's see if things are actually working. Let's start the game. So we have the purple string on the top left that says 2. So that's actually our option string that passed on to the game mode. So that's working. And we have our enemies spawning as well. So I think that's working also. And as you can see, the enemies replicate, so the host and the client can see enemies. So that's working. And I think our round wait function is not working, so we do have something to fix. So I'm gonna check what's wrong and get back to you guys. Okay, that's not too bad. I actually just forgot to add the call. So in our shooter game mode, at the end over here, the for each loop, if this returns false, all enemies are dead, and we want to start the intermission. So in this case, we need to call our event wave intermission. And that should complete the loop. So now the wave intermission will be called. After 3 seconds it should start the new wave. So let me fire up another multiplayer game and I'll be back soon to test. Okay, game is launching. So let's see if it works a little bit better this time. Let me kill a few of these guys. There we go, and now we have the print for the intermission, and we have the HUD on our screen popping up with wave number 2, so that's actually working. And we're starting a new wave, so I think we have our game mode set up. And it's just gonna continue spawning, so that's cool, that's working. Okay, so it wasn't really a long video today, and there wasn't really a whole lot of new stuff, but the option string is a pretty handy option that you can use in all kinds of ways. And now we have a small game that we can actually play for a little bit and shoot a bunch of enemies. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please consider leaving a like. It helps the channel tremendously, so I will be eternally grateful if you do. And I'll be soon back with more videos. Thanks for watching, everybody. Talk to you later.